My friends, there's a truth so simple, so obvious that we often miss it entirely. It is this: you were never meant to carry the weight of your own life. You were never meant to forge your own path, to be the master of your own fate, to clutch tightly at the reins of your own existence. The great secret, the life-changing truth, is that true life begins when you stop fighting and surrender to God. Life is full of burdens, pressures, and expectations. From the moment we wake up, we are confronted with responsibilities, decisions, and the constant demand to perform, achieve, and prove ourselves. The world tells us that our success, happiness, and future are in our hands, that we must take control, plan every step, and ensure that we do not falter. And so we live with the weight of our own existence, carrying every fear, every doubt, and every uncertainty on our own shoulders. But the truth, the life-changing truth, is that we were never meant to live this way. We were never meant to carry the full weight of our lives alone. From the very beginning, we were designed to walk in trust, to live in dependence on God, and to rest in His provision. The burden of self-sufficiency is one we were never created to bear, yet so many of us insist on carrying it. There is something in human nature that resists the idea of surrender. We like to be in control. We like to think that we can handle things on our own, that we are strong enough, wise enough, and capable enough to figure everything out. And yet, despite all our striving, we find ourselves exhausted, anxious, and overwhelmed. We lie awake at night worrying about the future, fearful of making the wrong choices, uncertain about what lies ahead. We grasp at security in the form of money, success, relationships, or personal achievement, believing that if we just try hard enough, we can create a life free from fear and struggle. But deep down, we know this is not true. No matter how hard we try to control our lives, uncertainty remains. No amount of planning can prevent suffering. No amount of effort can guarantee success. And despite all our striving, we still feel restless, as though something is missing. This is because we were not made to bear the burden of control. God never intended for us to navigate life alone. From the very beginning, He called humanity into relationship with Him, into a life of trust and dependence. He did not create us to be independent, but to be His children, relying on His wisdom, His strength, and His guidance. Like a father walking beside his child, God desires to lead us, to carry our burdens, and to give us rest. But He cannot do so unless we let go, unless we stop gripping so tightly to our own plans and surrender to His. Imagine a small child walking with his father. The father reaches out his hand, offering security and guidance, but the child insists on walking alone. He stumbles over stones, loses his way, and eventually grows tired. He could have walked with ease, held in the strength of his father's grip, but he chose to carry the burden of his own steps. This is the way many of us live our lives. We resist surrendering to God, insisting that we must figure things out on our own, and in doing so, we exhaust ourselves. The invitation of surrender is not an invitation to passivity. It is not an excuse to stop making decisions, to stop working, or to ignore our responsibilities. Rather, it is an invitation to release the weight of self-sufficiency. It is the decision to acknowledge that we are not in control, that we do not have all the answers, and that we do not have to figure everything out alone. It is the realization that we have a Father who is far wiser, far stronger, and far more loving than we could ever comprehend, and He is asking us to trust Him. Some may resist this idea, fearing that to surrender is to lose themselves, to give up their identity or their dreams. But the opposite is true. In surrender, we do not lose ourselves, we find ourselves. We do not fall into emptiness, we step into fullness. When we finally release the exhausting burden of self-reliance, we discover a peace that we could never manufacture on our own. We discover that God is not a harsh master demanding blind obedience, but a loving Father who desires our best. There is a reason that Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." He was not offering an abstract concept or a fleeting sense of relief. He was offering a way of life, one in which we no longer carry the crushing weight of our own existence. He was offering to take our burdens and replace them with his peace, but we must be willing to lay them down. So many of us live as though we must prove ourselves, as though our worth is determined by how much we achieve, how well we perform, or how perfectly we manage our lives. But God's love for us has never been based on our performance. It has never been dependent on how well we hold everything together. His love is constant, unwavering, and unshaken by our failures. He does not ask us to be enough. He simply asks us to come, to trust, and to rest in him. And so the question remains, will we keep striving, keep grasping, and keep exhausting ourselves in the pursuit of control? Or will we finally release the burden, open our hands, and surrender? When we do, we will find that the weight we have been carrying was never ours to bear in the first place. We will find that the hands of God are strong enough to hold us, to guide us, and to carry us through whatever lies ahead. And in that place of surrender, we will finally experience the life of peace, joy, and freedom that we were always meant to live. Surrender is a word that does not sit well with most people. It suggests weakness, defeat, or a giving up of something valuable. We live in a world that glorifies independence, strength, and self-sufficiency. From an early age, we are taught to fight for what we want, to push forward no matter the cost, and to take charge of our own destiny. Surrender, in this mindset, seems like the opposite of what we should strive for. It feels like losing control, like letting go of power, like becoming weak. But the kingdom of God does not operate by the world's standards. In God's kingdom, the greatest strength is found in surrender, and the deepest victory is found in laying down our own will. The truth is, we are not as strong as we like to believe. No matter how much we strive for control, life has a way of showing us just how little power we actually have. We plan for the future, yet circumstances change in an instant. We work tirelessly for security, yet unexpected struggles arise. We try to protect ourselves from pain, yet suffering comes anyway. If we were truly in control, none of these things would happen. And yet, despite this clear evidence of our limitations, we cling tightly to the illusion that we are in charge. We exhaust ourselves trying to hold everything together, trying to make life go according to our plans. But the reality is that the more we grasp for control, the more anxious, frustrated, and weary we become. Surrendering to God is not weakness. It is the greatest act of trust and courage. It takes far more strength to place our lives in His hands than to cling to our own understanding. To surrender is not to become passive or to stop making decisions. Rather, it is to recognize that our own wisdom is limited and that God's wisdom is infinite. It is the choice to trust that He sees what we cannot see, knows what we do not know, and will lead us in the way that is truly best. Surrender is not giving up. It is stepping into the true power and security that only God can provide. Consider the way a child trusts a loving parent. A child does not worry about whether there will be food on the table or whether tomorrow will bring safety. He simply trusts that his father or mother will provide because he knows he is loved. But as we grow older, we begin to believe that we must take care of everything ourselves. We begin to rely on our own strength, and in doing so, we step outside of the peace that comes from trusting in something greater than ourselves. Surrendering to God means acknowledging that we are not meant to carry the weight of our own lives. It means recognizing that we were created to depend on Him, not just in times of crisis, but in every moment. True surrender is not just about asking for God's help when we are desperate, but about walking with Him daily, seeking His will rather than our own. It is about letting go of the need to control every outcome and instead believing that He is guiding our steps. Many people resist surrender because they fear what it might cost them. They worry that if they give up control, God will take away what they love, lead them where they do not want to go, or demand too much of them. But this fear is based on a misunderstanding of who God is. God does not take for the sake of taking. He does not lead us into suffering for no reason. His plans for us are always for our good, even when we do not understand them. When we surrender, we are not placing our lives into the hands of a cruel master, but into the hands of a loving Father who desires what is best for us. The irony is that the things we refuse to surrender are often the very things that cause us the most anxiety. We hold tightly to our plans, our desires, and our fears, thinking that by doing so we can control them. But in reality, this only leads to greater stress and uncertainty. When we surrender to God, we release the burden of trying to figure everything out on our own. We step into a place of peace, knowing that we are held by the one who knows all things. True freedom is found not in holding on, but in letting go. The world tells us that strength is found in independence, but God tells us that strength is found in dependence on Him. The world tells us that victory comes through fighting for control, but God tells us that victory comes through trust. When we surrender, we do not become weak, we step into the greatest strength of all. We no longer have to strive, to fear, or to carry the impossible weight of our own lives. Instead, we can rest in the assurance that we are in the hands of a God who loves us, who knows us, and who will never fail us. Surrender is one of the hardest things for a human heart to do. We are naturally inclined to seek control, to chart our own course, to make our own decisions. We are taught to be self-sufficient, to rely on our own understanding, and to take charge of our destiny. But there is a truth we often overlook, a truth that can change everything. God cannot fully transform a heart that insists on its own way. As long as we hold tightly to our plans, our desires, and our own sense of direction, we block the very work that God wants to do in us. Imagine a person drowning in deep waters. In a panic, they thrash and fight, desperate to keep themselves afloat. But the more they struggle, the more they sink. A lifeguard reaches out to save them, but until they stop fighting, they cannot be rescued. This is how many of us live our spiritual lives. We cling to our own efforts, believing that we must save ourselves. We resist surrender because we fear losing control. Yet in our resistance, we only make things harder for ourselves. The moment we finally let go, the moment we stop striving and allow God to take over, we find the rescue we have been searching for all along. God desires to shape us, to mold us into the people He created us to be. He has a purpose for each of us, a plan far greater than anything we could design for ourselves, but He does not force His way into our lives. He does not impose His will upon us against our desires. Instead, He invites us to trust Him. He invites us to open our hands and release our grip on the things we are so desperately trying to control. Until we do, He cannot fully work in us because He will not compete with our stubborn insistence on having our own way. Many people resist surrender because they are afraid of what God might ask of them. They fear that if they fully yield to Him, He will take away what they love, send them where they do not want to go, or demand something too difficult to bear. But this fear is based on a misunderstanding of God's character. He is not a harsh master waiting to take from us for the sake of taking. He is a loving Father who knows what is truly best for us. When He asks us to surrender something, it is never to harm us. It is always to lead us into something better. There are things in every heart that must be surrendered before God can do His greatest work. Sometimes it is a dream we refuse to let go of, believing that our happiness depends on it. Sometimes it is a relationship we hold too tightly, fearing that if we trust God with it, we may lose it. Sometimes it is our own sense of identity built on our achievements, our reputation, or the approval of others. Whatever it may be, the truth is the same. As long as we cling to our own way, we block the greater work God wants to do in us. Surrendering to God does not mean abandoning effort or ceasing to care about life's direction. It means shifting our trust away from ourselves and placing it fully in Him. It means saying, Lord, I do not need to be in control because I trust that You are. It means choosing to believe that He knows what is best even when we do not understand. It means letting go of the exhausting burden of trying to figure everything out on our own, and instead resting in the security of His wisdom and love. Some may ask, what if God's plan for me is different from what I want? The answer is simple: it will be better. It may not be easier, it may not look the way we imagined, but it will always be better because He is good. There is no safer place to be than in His hands, no greater purpose than the one He has prepared. When we surrender, we are not stepping into uncertainty, we are stepping into the certainty of His perfect will. The irony of surrender is that it feels like a loss, yet it is the key to our greatest freedom. It feels like giving up, yet it is the beginning of true victory. When we let go of our own way, we make room for God to move in ways we never could have imagined. When we release control, we finally find peace. And when we surrender to Him, we discover that what we feared losing was nothing compared to what we gain in His presence. So the question remains, will we keep clinging to our own way, exhausting ourselves in the process? Or will we finally let go, allowing God to do in us what only He can do? The choice is ours, but the truth remains: He cannot fully transform a heart that refuses to surrender. There is a longing in every human heart for peace. People spend their lives searching for it, chasing after things they believe will bring them a sense of rest, fulfillment, and security. Some seek it in success, believing that if they achieve enough, they will finally feel satisfied. Others look for it in relationships, hoping that the right person will fill the emptiness inside. Many turn to distractions, entertainment, or even substances to escape the inner turmoil they cannot quiet. But no matter how much they strive, peace always seems just out of reach. The reason for this is simple: true and lasting peace does not come from anything the world can offer. It can only be found in trusting God. When we try to control our own lives, we carry a weight we were never meant to bear. We worry about the future, anxious about what will happen next. We try to plan every detail, fearing that if we do not, things will fall apart. We hold tightly to our own desires, unwilling to release them, even when they cause us stress and fear. And yet, despite all our efforts, life remains unpredictable. We cannot control every outcome. We cannot protect ourselves from every hardship, and so we live in a constant state of unrest, caught in a cycle of striving, worrying, and fearing what we cannot control. But the moment we surrender to God, everything changes. When we finally lay down our need to control, when we choose to trust that He is good and that His plans are better than our own, we step into a peace that surpasses all understanding. This peace is not dependent on circumstances. It does not fade when life is difficult. It is not shaken by uncertainty. It is the deep and unshakable peace that comes from knowing that we are held by the One who created the universe. It is the assurance that we do not have to figure everything out because He already has. Many people resist surrender because they believe that letting go means losing something. They fear that if they place their lives in God's hands, they will no longer be in control. But the truth is, we were never in control to begin with. Life is filled with unknowns, and no matter how much we plan or prepare, we cannot predict the future. The idea that we can control everything is an illusion, and clinging to it only leads to stress and anxiety. Surrender is not about losing, it is about gaining something far greater: freedom from the burden of trying to manage what was never ours to control in the first place. Trusting God does not mean that life will be easy. There will still be challenges, disappointments, and moments of uncertainty. But when we surrender, we are no longer facing these things alone. We are no longer relying on our own limited strength and understanding. Instead, we are resting in the assurance that God is with us, guiding us, providing for us, and working all things together for our good. This is where true peace is found, not in perfect circumstances, but in perfect trust. There are countless stories of people who found peace only after they stopped striving and surrendered to God. Some spent years trying to force their own plans, only to realize that they were exhausting themselves for something that was never meant to be. Others held tightly to their own desires, afraid that if they let go, they would be left empty. But every single person who has chosen to trust God has discovered the same truth. What He has planned is always better than what we could have imagined for ourselves. Peace is not something we achieve through effort. It is not something we find by working harder or planning better. It is a gift that comes when we let go. It is the natural result of surrender, the byproduct of trust. When we place our lives in God's hands, when we choose to believe that He is good and that He is for us, peace follows. It fills the spaces that were once occupied by fear. It replaces anxiety with assurance. It turns uncertainty into a quiet confidence that no matter what happens, we are held. The world will always offer temporary solutions for anxiety and restlessness. It will tell us that if we just have more money, more success, or more control, we will finally feel at peace. But time and time again, these things fail to satisfy. True and lasting peace does not come from external circumstances. It comes from an internal surrender. It is the result of knowing that our lives are not in our own hands, but in the hands of a God who loves us more than we could ever comprehend. The invitation to surrender is an invitation to rest. It is an invitation to release the burdens that have weighed us down for so long. It is a call to step into the freedom of trusting a God who is infinitely wise, infinitely powerful, and infinitely loving. Those who surrender experience the deepest peace, while those who insist on control find themselves restless and weary. The choice is ours, but the truth remains. Peace is found not in grasping for control, but in trusting the one who already holds everything in his hands. One of the deepest wounds left by a narcissistic relationship is the fear of love itself. When love has been used as a weapon, when words of affection have been laced with control, when promises have turned to manipulation, the heart learns to associate love with pain. It begins to doubt its own ability to recognize what is real and what is false. The mind replays past mistakes, questioning every moment, every decision, every red flag that was missed. And in that uncertainty, a silent vow is often made: never again. Never again will I let someone in. Never again will I trust so easily. Never again will I open my heart only to have it shattered. This vow feels like protection, like wisdom, like the only way to move forward without risking further devastation. But in truth, it is a prison. The enemy would love nothing more than for pain to close the heart entirely. He would love for fear to take root so deeply that love, real, God-given, life-giving love, is no longer even a possibility. He knows that isolation is one of the most effective ways to keep a person trapped in the wounds of their past. If he can convince you that love is too dangerous, that trust is too costly, that opening your heart will only lead to more suffering, then he has succeeded in keeping you from one of God's greatest gifts. But God has not given a spirit of fear. He has not called his children to live in the shadow of past betrayals. He has called them to freedom, to joy, to love, not the false, manipulative love of the past, but the true, pure, unwavering love that comes from him. There is a difference between wisdom and fear. Wisdom says, I have learned from the past and I will walk carefully, seeking discernment and truth. Fear says, I have been hurt and I will never risk being hurt again. Wisdom leads to healing. Fear leads to isolation, and isolation is not where God wants his children to remain. He created love. He designed the heart to give and receive love. It was never meant to be locked away behind walls of self-protection. Yet stepping out of that fear is not easy. It requires trust, not in another person, but in God. It requires the belief that he will not allow his children to walk blindly into harm again, that he will give the wisdom and discernment needed to recognize what is real and what is not. It requires understanding that love, when given and received in a godly way, does not destroy, it builds. It does not manipulate, it nurtures. It does not take, it gives. Love, in its truest form, reflects the very nature of God Himself. To learn to love again, one must first learn to be loved by God. His love is the foundation upon which all other love should be built. It is not dependent on perfection. It does not vanish at the first sign of struggle. It does not change based on mood or convenience. His love is steadfast, unwavering, constant. I have loved you with an everlasting love. I have drawn you with unfailing kindness. Jeremiah 31:3. This is the love that heals. This is the love that restores. This is the love that casts out fear. And when His love is truly embraced, fear begins to loosen its grip. The heart, once afraid of being vulnerable, begins to soften. The walls, once built to keep everyone out, begin to lower. There is no need to rush. Healing does not come all at once, but step by step, the heart begins to trust again, not in people, not in circumstances, but in God's ability to guide, protect, and provide. There will be moments of hesitation. There will be moments when the past whispers, "What if it happens again?" But God's voice is louder, saying, "I am with you. I go before you. I will never leave you nor forsake you." The past is a lesson, not a life sentence. What was meant for harm, God will use for good. The love that was misused, He will replace with something real. The wounds that were inflicted, He will turn into wisdom, not as a barrier to love, but as a guide to finding the right kind of love. And when that love comes, whether in the form of deep friendships, renewed family relationships, or even a future romantic relationship, it will not feel like the love of the past. It will not feel like walking on eggshells, constantly trying to earn affection. It will not feel like an emotional roller coaster, always uncertain of where you stand. It will feel like peace. It will feel like home. Love was never meant to be a source of fear. It was never meant to be a battlefield where one must fight to be seen, heard, and valued. Love, real love, is a reflection of God's own nature, and that love is still possible. It has not been lost. It has not been ruined by the past. It is waiting in God's perfect time, in God's perfect way. The heart that once vowed to never love again will one day realize that love was never the problem. The problem was the counterfeit version of it. And now, armed with wisdom, strengthened by healing, and guided by God's truth, that heart will be ready not to hide, but to receive what was always meant for it. Forgiveness is one of the hardest things to face after a narcissistic relationship. When someone has been used, manipulated, and emotionally torn apart, the idea of forgiving the person who caused that pain can feel impossible. Forgiveness is often misunderstood. It is not excusing the harm that was done. It is not pretending that the betrayal did not happen. It is not opening the door for that person to return and cause more damage. Forgiveness is not about them at all. It is about releasing yourself from the weight of what they did. It is about choosing freedom over bitterness, healing over resentment, and peace over the endless cycle of anger and pain. There is a natural desire for justice when someone has been wronged. The heart cries out for fairness, for the truth to be acknowledged, for the person who inflicted harm to understand the damage they caused. But in many cases, that moment never comes. The narcissist does not apologize. They do not take responsibility. They continue on as if nothing happened, leaving behind a trail of brokenness while acting as though they are the victim. This is one of the most painful realities to accept. The closure that seems so necessary, the apology that feels like it would bring healing, may never arrive. And so the question remains, how can I forgive when they do not deserve it? The truth is, forgiveness is not about whether or not they deserve it. It is about whether or not you deserve to be free. Holding on to resentment does not punish the one who caused the pain. It only keeps you tied to them It allows them to have continued power over your emotions, your thoughts, your sense of peace. It keeps the wound open, preventing true healing from taking place. The longer unforgiveness remains, the deeper the roots of bitterness grow, and bitterness is a poison. It does not simply stay confined to the past, it begins to spread into every part of life. It clouds the ability to trust, to hope, to experience joy. It affects not only the relationship that caused it, but also every relationship that follows. God calls his children to forgive, not because he minimizes their pain, but because he knows that unforgiveness is a prison. Forgive as the Lord forgave you, Colossians 3:13. This is not an easy command. It is not something that happens in an instant or without struggle, but it is something that leads to freedom. Forgiveness does not mean trusting again. It does not mean allowing the person back into your life. It does not mean denying the reality of what happened. It means releasing the need for justice into God's hands. God is the ultimate judge. He sees everything. He knows every lie that was spoken, every act of manipulation, every tear that was shed in silence. Nothing is hidden from him. And he is just. He will deal with the wrongs that were committed. He will bring justice in his time and in his way. It is mine to avenge. I will repay, says the Lord, Romans 12:19. When forgiveness feels impossible, it is because the weight of justice is being carried alone. But God never intended for his children to carry that burden. He asks for trust. Trust that he will handle what needs to be handled. Trust that his justice is far greater than anything human hands could bring. Trust that he has not forgotten. Forgiveness is not a feeling, it is a decision. It is a daily choice to release the resentment, to let go of the anger, to refuse to let the past control the future. Some days it may feel easier than others. Some days the memories will return with force and the pain will feel fresh again. But forgiveness is not a one-time event. It is a continual act of surrender. And each time it is chosen, the grip of the past loosens a little more. There is also a fear that forgiving means that what happened was acceptable, that it lets the person off the hook. But forgiveness does not erase consequences. It does not mean reconciliation. It does not mean that trust is restored. It simply means that the heart is no longer weighed down by the need for revenge. It means stepping into the life that God has planned, unchained from the hurt that was meant to destroy. Jesus himself understood the weight of betrayal. He was denied, abandoned, falsely accused, and crucified by the very people he came to save. And yet his words on the cross were not words of condemnation, but of forgiveness. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Luke 23:34. This is the example of love that does not make sense in human terms. It is love that chooses grace over vengeance, peace over pain. Forgiveness is not about changing the past. It is about reclaiming the future. It is about walking forward without dragging the weight of bitterness along. It is about breaking free from the invisible chains that keep the heart stuck in a place of hurt. It is about trusting that God is still in control, that he sees, that he knows, that he will make all things right in his time. The enemy wants forgiveness to seem impossible because he knows that unforgiveness keeps people trapped. He wants the wounds to stay open, the anger to remain, the past to dictate the future. But God calls his children higher. He calls them into freedom, into healing, into a life that is not defined by pain, but by his grace. Forgiveness is not weakness, it is the ultimate strength. It is the declaration that the past does not hold power anymore. It is the act of stepping out of the shadows of hurt and into the light of God's love. It is a journey, and sometimes a difficult one, but every step toward forgiveness is a step toward the abundant life that God has promised. The pain was real, but it does not have to be permanent. The hurt was deep, but it does not have to define the future. Freedom is found in forgiveness, and in that freedom, healing begins.